Karoline Leavitt was not your typical journalist. At just 27 years old, she had already made a name for herself in the world of news and media. Her sharp wit, quick thinking, and ability to ask the tough questions earned her both admiration and criticism. While many reporters played it safe when interviewing celebrities or public figures, Karoline wasn't afraid to dig deeper. She believed that journalism wasn't just about fluff pieces or promoting movies. It was about uncovering truths, even if those truths were uncomfortable. On this particular morning, Karoline felt a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling inside her. Today was different. Today, she was going to interview none other than Robert De Niro, one of Hollywood's most iconic actors. Known for his intense performances in films like Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, and The Godfather Part 2, De Niro was more than just a movie star. He was a cultural legend. But he was also known for being fiercely private, notoriously difficult to interview, and unafraid to speak his mind on controversial topics. The assignment came unexpectedly. A producer from a popular morning show reached out to Karoline after hearing about her work covering political scandals and human interest stories. They wanted someone who could bring depth to the segment, someone who wouldn't shy away from asking meaningful questions. The show's theme for the day was Hollywood icons, and they were featuring De Niro to promote his latest film, a gritty drama that critics were already calling Oscar-worthy. Karoline accepted the offer without hesitation, but as soon as she did, reality hit her. Interviewing Robert De Niro? This wasn't just another guest. This was the Robert De Niro. His piercing eyes, gravelly voice, and commanding presence had intimidated countless interviewers before her. And then there was the added challenge. De Niro wasn't exactly known for playing nice during interviews. Over the years, he had walked out of several live interviews, snapped at reporters, and flat out refused to answer certain questions. If Karoline wanted to make this interview memorable, for all the right reasons, she would need to tread carefully. As she prepared for the big day, Karoline spent hours researching everything she could about De Niro. She watched old interviews, read articles, and studied his body language in various settings. She learned that while he valued professionalism, he despised anything he perceived as insincere or overly rehearsed. He didn't like small talk either. If she wanted to earn his respect, she'd have to come prepared with thoughtful, genuine questions. But something else caught Karoline's attention as she dug deeper into De Niro's recent activities. Beyond his acting career, he had become increasingly vocal about politics. Whether it was speaking out against certain leaders or advocating for social causes, De Niro rarely held back. Some people admired him for using his platform to address important issues, while others accused him of being divisive and reckless. It was a polarizing aspect of his public persona, and Karoline sensed an opportunity. She knew that most journalists would stick to the script during such a high-profile interview, asking predictable questions about his latest project, his acting process, or perhaps his favorite roles over the years. But Karoline had built her reputation on taking risks. Why should this interview be any different? After much deliberation, she decided to include a question about his political views. Not just any question, though. It would be pointed, relevant, and designed to spark a real conversation. The night before the interview, Karoline couldn't sleep. She replayed every possible scenario in her head. What if De Niro shut down completely? What if he got angry? Or worse, what if he walked off the set mid-interview? These thoughts swirled around her mind like a storm, but deep down she trusted her instincts. She reminded herself why she became a journalist in the first place: to tell stories that mattered, to hold people accountable, and to give a voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. When the morning finally arrived, Karoline woke up early and went through her usual routine. She dressed professionally but comfortably, choosing an outfit that exuded confidence without being distracting. As she headed to the studio, she repeated a mantra to herself: stay calm, stay focused, trust the process. Upon arriving, the energy in the studio was electric. Crew members bustled around, adjusting lights, testing microphones, and making last-minute preparations. Karoline introduced herself to the team and was escorted to the green room, where she waited for her cue. Through the walls, she could hear snippets of the show's opening segments, the host welcoming the audience, teasing upcoming guests, and hyping up De Niro's appearance. Then, the moment came. Karoline was called to the stage, and as she walked out, she spotted him sitting there in the flesh. Robert De Niro. He looked exactly how she imagined, sharp, composed, and radiating authority. For a brief second, their eyes met, and Karoline felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it. No turning back now. The stage lights were bright, almost blinding, but Karoline didn't let it show. She took a deep breath, smiled warmly, and walked toward Robert De Niro with steady steps. The audience clapped politely as she settled into her seat across from him. Up close, he seemed even more imposing than she had imagined. His sharp features, piercing gaze, and the quiet confidence that came naturally to someone who had spent decades commanding attention on screen. "Good morning, Mr. De Niro," Karoline began, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you so much for joining us today." De Niro gave a slight nod, his expression neutral. "Morning," he replied in that unmistakable, gravelly tone of his. It wasn't exactly welcoming, but it wasn't hostile either. Karoline reminded herself to stay focused. For the first few minutes, everything went smoothly. Karoline started with some light, easy questions about his latest film. She asked about the character he played, how he prepared for the role, and what drew him to the project. De Niro answered each question thoughtfully, though he kept his responses brief and to the point. He wasn't one for long-winded answers, and Karoline respected that. Still, she noticed something in his demeanor, a kind of guardedness, as if he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. As the conversation progressed, Karoline transitioned to slightly more personal territory. She asked about his experiences working with the director and whether there were any challenges during filming. Again, De Niro responded without hesitation, sharing anecdotes that painted him as both passionate and meticulous about his craft. The audience listened intently, clearly captivated by the insights from one of cinema's greatest legends. But Karoline knew this wasn't just another run-of-the-mill celebrity interview. This was her chance to ask the tough questions, the ones no one else dared to bring up. She glanced at her notes briefly, then looked back at De Niro. Her heart was racing, but her face betrayed none of it. With a polite smile, she shifted gears. "Mr. De Niro," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you've always been known not just as an incredible actor, but also as someone who isn't afraid to speak your mind on important issues. In recent years, you've been very vocal about certain political topics, which has sparked quite a bit of discussion among fans and critics alike. I'm curious, do you ever feel like speaking out comes at a cost? Do you ever worry about alienating people because of your views?" There was a moment of silence, a beat where the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. De Niro's expression didn't change immediately, but Karoline could see the shift in his eyes. They narrowed slightly and his jaw tightened. For a split second, she wondered if she had pushed too far too soon. But then he spoke. "I don't think we're here to talk politics," he said, his voice firm but controlled. There was an edge to it, a warning. He shifted in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest. The casual ease he had displayed earlier was gone, replaced by something harder, more defensive. Karoline nodded quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Of course, I understand and I appreciate your work in film above all else. But given your influence and the platform you have, many people look to you not only as an artist but also as a public figure. Doesn't that come with a responsibility to address the issues that matter?" De Niro stared at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he leaned forward. "Look," he said, his voice rising just enough to make her sit up straighter. "I've never shied away from saying what I believe, that's my right. But when I agree to do interviews, I expect them to focus on the work, the art, not agendas." The audience murmured softly, sensing the shift in tone. Some nodded in agreement with De Niro, while others exchanged glances, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Karoline, however, remained composed. She hadn't expected him to roll over and answer willingly, but she also hadn't anticipated such a direct pushback so early in the interview. Still, she pressed on, determined to get her point across. "I completely respect that," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But isn't it fair to say that your statements, whether they're about politics or social issues, carry weight? People listen to you, and sometimes those statements can divide opinions. Have you ever regretted making certain comments knowing how polarizing they might be?" This time, De Niro didn't respond right away. He sat back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His silence was deafening, and Karoline couldn't help but wonder if she had crossed a line. Was he going to shut down entirely? Walk off the set? The possibilities raced through her mind, but she forced herself to stay present, to maintain eye contact, and to wait for his response. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Let me tell you something," he said, pointing a finger at her for emphasis. "If you're asking me if I regret standing up for what I believe in, the answer is no. What I do regret is sitting here, wasting time talking about things that have nothing to do with why I'm here today." The audience gasped audibly, and Karoline felt her stomach drop. She had prepared for resistance, but this level of frustration was unexpected. Part of her wanted to apologize, to pivot back to safer ground. But another part, the part that had driven her career thus far, knew she couldn't back down now. This was the moment she had been building toward. "I hear you, Mr. De Niro," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in front of her. "And I apologize if it seems like I'm steering away from the main purpose of this interview. My intention isn't to ambush you. It's to explore the full scope of who you are. You're not just an actor, you're a cultural icon. People want to understand all sides of you, including the beliefs you champion outside of your films." De Niro exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You journalists always try to twist things," he muttered under his breath, though the microphone picked it up clearly. The audience reacted again, some laughing nervously, others whispering to their neighbors. Karoline felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to let it break her. Instead, she offered a small, respectful smile. "Twisting isn't my goal," she said sincerely. "My goal is to have an honest conversation, one that reflects the complexity of the person sitting across from me. If that makes me unpopular, so be it. But I stand by my questions." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. De Niro's eyes bore into hers, searching for something. Weakness, perhaps, or a crack in her resolve. But Karoline held her ground, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. Whatever happened next, she knew she had done her job. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The silence between Karoline and Robert De Niro stretched for what felt like an eternity. The studio, usually buzzing with energy, was now eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of the cameras rolling. Every eye in the room was glued to the unfolding scene, Karoline sitting calmly but firmly, De Niro visibly irritated and on edge. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It had become a clash of wills. De Niro broke the silence first. Leaning forward in his chair, he fixed Karoline with a steely glare. "You know," he began, his voice rising slightly, "this isn't journalism. This is sensationalism. You're trying to make headlines at my expense." His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. He gestured toward her as if to emphasize his point, his frustration spilling over into every syllable. Karoline didn't flinch. She knew this moment could define her career for better or worse. Taking a deep breath, she responded evenly, "Mr. De Niro, I assure you that's not my intention. My job as a journalist is to ask questions that matter, to explore the full picture of who you are. Your opinions influence millions of people and they deserve to be discussed openly." Her composure only seemed to infuriate him further. De Niro sat back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. "No, no, no," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You don't get it. You think because you have a microphone and a platform, You can twist my words however you want. But let me tell you something, you're out of line. At this point, the audience erupted into murmurs. Some clapped instinctively, perhaps out of shock or admiration for De Niro's boldness. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to side with the legendary actor or the young journalist who refused to back down. Even the show's host, seated off to the side, shifted awkwardly in their chair, clearly uncertain how to intervene without escalating the situation further. Karoline, however, remained unfazed. She leaned forward slightly, her expression calm, but resolute. "If asking difficult questions makes me out of line, then so be it," she replied. "But I'm not here to cater to anyone's comfort zone, not yours, not mine, and certainly not the audience's. These are valid questions, Mr. De Niro. People care about what you say because you're influential. That comes with accountability." Niro's face reddened, his patience clearly wearing thin. He pointed a finger at her, jabbing it toward her as if to punctuate each word. "Accountability? Accountability? You're holding me accountable while twisting everything around to suit your narrative. That's not accountability, that's manipulation." His voice boomed across the studio, causing a few members of the crew to exchange nervous glances. No one had expected the interview to take such a dramatic turn. Karoline, though outwardly composed, could feel her pulse racing. She knew she was walking a tightrope, balancing professionalism with persistence. One wrong move and the entire segment could collapse. Still, she pressed on. "Manipulation implies dishonesty, Mr. De Niro," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I'm simply asking for clarity. If your statements have caused division among your fans, isn't it fair to address that? To explain where you stand?" De Niro slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair, startling everyone, including Karoline, though she didn't let it show. "Division? Division!" he repeated, his voice louder than ever. "You're the one creating division by dragging politics into this. I came here to talk about my movie, not to debate ideologies with someone half my age who thinks she knows better than me." The audience gasped audibly, some applauding in agreement, others looking uneasy. Karoline took a brief pause, allowing his words to hang in the air. For a moment she considered retreating, softening her approach to salvage the rest of the interview. But something inside her pushed back against that instinct. She reminded herself why she was there, not to win a popularity contest, but to do her job with integrity. "I understand your frustration," she said finally, her tone softer but still firm. "And I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. But discomfort often leads to meaningful conversations. Isn't that worth exploring?" De Niro stared at her, his jaw clenched tightly. For a fleeting second, it seemed like he might storm off the set. He glanced at the cameras, then back at Karoline, his chest rising and falling with controlled anger. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defiantly. "You're relentless," he muttered, almost under his breath. "Do what you want. Ask whatever you want. But don't expect me to play along." Karoline nodded, acknowledging his stance. "Fair enough," she said simply. She decided to pivot slightly, easing the intensity of her questioning while still addressing the elephant in the room. "Let's talk about influence then. As someone who's inspired generations of actors and filmmakers, how do you view your role in shaping public discourse outside of entertainment?" For a moment, De Niro didn't respond. He rubbed his temples, seemingly weighing his options. Then, with a heavy sigh, he answered tersely, "I use my voice when I see injustice, plain and simple. If that ruffles feathers, so be it. I'm not here to please everyone." It wasn't the elaborate answer Karoline had hoped for, but it was something, a glimpse into his mindset, however guarded. Sensing that pushing further would only escalate the tension, she chose to wrap up the segment gracefully. "Thank you for sharing your perspective, Mr. De Niro," she said, offering a polite smile. "And thank you for joining us today. Your work continues to inspire countless people around the world." As the interview concluded, the atmosphere in the studio remained tense. The audience applauded politely, though many exchanged bewildered looks. De Niro stood up abruptly, gave a curt nod to Karoline, and walked off the set without another word. Karoline watched him go, her heart pounding but her resolve intact. Backstage, the crew buzzed with excitement and disbelief. The producer approached Karoline wide-eyed. "That was insane," he said, shaking his head. "Are you okay?" Karoline exhaled deeply, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed a hint of exhaustion. "I knew it might get heated, but I didn't expect it to blow up like that." "Well, one thing's for sure," the producer added with a grin. "This is going viral." And he was right. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, clips of the explosive exchange began circulating online. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, memes, and hot takes. Some praised Karoline for her courage, calling her a fearless truth seeker. Others accused her of being disrespectful and overly aggressive. Meanwhile, Robert De Niro's terse dismissal of her questions fueled even more debate, turning the incident into a full-blown cultural moment. For Karoline, the aftermath was a whirlwind. Messages poured in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike, some congratulating her, others criticizing her methods. Yet amidst the chaos, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had faced one of Hollywood's most intimidating figures head-on and held her ground. Whether people agreed with her or not, she had done what she believed was right. Little did she know this was only the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that would shape her career and legacy in ways she could never have anticipated. The moment the interview ended, Karoline stepped off the stage and into a whirlwind. Backstage was chaotic, crew members whispering urgently, producers pacing with phones glued to their ears, and makeup artists frozen in place, unsure whether to celebrate or console her. The air buzzed with tension and excitement. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Within minutes, clips of the heated exchange between Karoline Leavitt and Robert De Niro began flooding social media platforms. Twitter exploded with hashtags like "In Karoline vis De Niro," "Journalism Under Fire," and "De Niro Meltdown." Instagram users shared screenshots of De Niro's angry expression alongside memes poking fun at his reaction. YouTube creators scrambled to upload edited versions of the interview, adding dramatic music and captions for maximum impact. Even TikTok joined the frenzy, with users reenacting the confrontation in skits that ranged from comedic to supportive. The video clips went viral. Public opinion split down the middle. On one side were those who hailed Karoline as a hero, a brave journalist standing up to a Hollywood giant. They praised her for refusing to back down and for asking tough questions that others might have avoided. Finally, someone holding celebrities accountable read one popular comment on Twitter. Another user wrote, "Karoline didn't just do her job, she reminded us what real journalism looks like." On the other side were critics who accused her of being overly aggressive and disrespectful. Some argued that she had crossed a line by bringing politics into an entertainment-focused interview. "This is why celebrities hate doing interviews," one commenter grumbled. Others defended De Niro, claiming he had every right to be upset. A particularly scathing post accused Karoline of ambushing him solely for clicks and attention. News outlets couldn't resist jumping on the story. Cable networks dedicated entire segments to dissecting the incident. Talk show hosts debated whether Karoline's approach was justified or reckless. Late-night comedians turned the interview into fodder for their monologues, cracking jokes about De Niro's fiery temper and Karoline's steely resolve. One comedian quipped, "If Robert De Niro gets any angrier, he might start auditioning for Angry Birds." Meanwhile, Karoline found herself at the center of the storm. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications poured in non-stop from friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers. Some messages were congratulatory, thanking her for taking a stand. Others were harshly critical, accusing her of ruining what could have been a positive promotional opportunity for De Niro's film. At times, it felt overwhelming, but Karoline refused to let the negativity consume her. She reminded herself why she had pursued journalism in the first place, to spark meaningful conversations, even if they came at a cost. Robert De Niro, too, faced intense scrutiny. While many fans rallied behind him, praising his refusal to play, along with what they saw as an unfair line of questioning. Others questioned his behavior. Some pointed out that, as a public figure, he should expect tough questions, and that lashing out only made him appear defensive. A few commentators noted that De Niro's reputation for being difficult during interviews wasn't helping matters. One writer penned an op-ed titled, "When Legends Lose Their Cool, the De Niro Interview Debacle," arguing that while Karoline may have pushed boundaries, De Niro's explosive reaction overshadowed any valid points he tried to make. Amid the chaos, both parties responded publicly, but not directly to each other. De Niro released a brief statement through his representative later that evening. In it, he expressed disappointment over how the interview unfolded, calling it a betrayal of journalistic integrity. He reiterated his belief that such interviews should focus on promoting art rather than stirring controversy. Though his tone was measured, the underlying frustration was clear. Karoline, on the other hand, appeared on a late-night talk show the following day to address the backlash. Dressed in a sleek yet professional outfit, she sat across from the host and spoke candidly about her experience. "I knew going into this interview that it wouldn't be easy," she admitted. "But I also knew that my responsibility as a journalist is to ask tough questions, to hold people accountable regardless of their status. Did I push too hard? Maybe. But I stand by my decision because these are important conversations we need to have." Her appearance on the talk show only fueled more discussion. Supporters applauded her transparency and grace under pressure, while detractors accused her of milking the controversy for personal gain. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. Karoline Leavitt was now a household name. 3. Fallout extended beyond social media and news coverage. Offers began pouring in for Karoline to share her side of the story on various platforms. Podcast hosts invited her to discuss the ethics of journalism in the age of celebrity culture. News programs asked her to analyze the broader implications of the incident. Even academic institutions reached out, requesting her participation in panel discussions about media responsibility and free speech. At the same time, De Niro's team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. They arranged for him to appear on a prestigious morning show, where he discussed his latest film in depth without mentioning the controversial interview. When pressed by the host about the viral clip, he brushed it off with a simple, "Let's focus on the work." Despite his attempts to redirect attention, however, the shadow of the interview loomed large over his promotional tour. For Karoline, the sudden surge in visibility brought both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, she gained access to doors that had previously been closed to her. High-profile editors and producers sought her input on future projects, recognizing her ability to command attention and provoke thought. On the other hand, the constant spotlight took a toll. Friends noticed she seemed more guarded, less willing to open up about her feelings. Behind closed doors, she confided in a close colleague, admitting, "It's exhausting. Every move I make feels like it's being scrutinized." Despite the fatigue, Karoline remained committed to her principles. She continued to tackle challenging topics in her reporting, refusing to shy away from controversy. Each new assignment became a chance to prove that her intentions were genuine, that she wasn't just chasing headlines, but striving to uncover truths. As days turned into weeks, the initial frenzy surrounding the interview began to die down, yet its ripple effects lingered. Journalists everywhere debated the fine line between boldness and insensitivity, using Karoline's actions as a case study. Aspiring reporters looked to her as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. And audiences, whether they loved or hated her, couldn't deny that she had sparked a national conversation about accountability, influence, and the role of the press in modern society. In the end, the incident cemented Karoline Leavitt's place in the world of journalism, not as someone who played it safe, but as someone unafraid to take risks. Whether those risks paid off in the long run remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. She had left an indelible mark on the industry, and on the man she interviewed that fateful morning. In the weeks following the explosive interview, Karoline Leavitt's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Overnight, she went from being a respected but relatively unknown journalist to a polarizing public figure. The spotlight was relentless, shining on her every move, dissecting her words and amplifying her actions. While some hailed her as a trailblazer for modern journalism, others vilified her as an opportunist who prioritized sensationalism over professionalism. Yet through it all, Karoline refused to let the noise define her. One of the first major opportunities came in the form of an invitation to appear on a highly influential late-night talk show hosted by a well-known comedian and political commentator. It was a coveted slot, typically reserved for A-list celebrities or politicians making headlines. For Karoline, this was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. She knew that millions of viewers would tune in, not just to hear her side of the story, but to judge her character based on how she presented herself. The host greeted her warmly when she arrived backstage, offering words of encouragement. "You've got guts," he said with a grin. "Whatever happens tonight, own it." His advice stuck with her as she walked onto the stage to a mix of applause and scattered boos from the live audience. Dressed in a tailored navy suit paired with a bold red blouse, Karoline exuded confidence despite the palpable tension in the room. The host dove right into the heart of the matter. "Karoline, let's cut to the chase. You sat across from Robert De Niro, a Hollywood legend, and asked questions most journalists wouldn't dare touch. Now you're at the center of one of the biggest media storms we've seen in years. What's going through your mind?" Karoline took a deep breath before responding. "Honestly, it's surreal. I didn't wake up that morning thinking my name would trend worldwide. But I also didn't shy away from asking those questions because I believe they were important. Yes, Mr. De Niro is an icon, but he's also someone whose voice carries immense weight. When people like him speak out about divisive issues, it impacts millions. My job isn't to agree or disagree, it's to ask why." Her answer earned a round of applause from parts of the audience while others remained silent, seemingly unconvinced. The host pressed further. "But here's the thing. Some critics say you ambushed him. They argue that interviews tied to movie promotions should focus on entertainment, not politics. How do you respond to that?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful but resolute. "I understand where they're coming from. Promotional interviews are designed to highlight art, and I respect that. But we can't ignore the fact that artists, especially ones as influential as Mr. De Niro, are often activists too. Their work reflects their beliefs, and their beliefs shape their work. Separating the two isn't always possible. If anything, I think audiences benefit from understanding the full picture of who these figures are." The segment continued, with the host skillfully navigating between lighthearted banter and deeper discussions about the state of journalism today. By the time the interview ended, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the criticism she faced, she realized that many people appreciated her commitment to transparency and accountability. That realization fueled her determination to keep pushing boundaries, even if it meant enduring more backlash. As word spread about her appearance on the talk show, invitations began pouring in from all corners of the media landscape. Podcast. Hosts eager to discuss the ethics of interviewing celebrities reached out. News anchors invited her to share insights on panels about media responsibility. Even academic institutions extended offers for her to speak at conferences exploring the intersection of journalism, politics, and pop culture. Each opportunity allowed Karoline to refine her message and connect with new audiences. But fame came with its challenges. Walking down the street, she noticed strangers recognizing her more frequently, some stopping to thank her, others glaring disapprovingly. Online trolls targeted her relentlessly, leaving hateful comments on her social media posts and sending venomous messages to her inbox. At times, the negativity weighed heavily on her, forcing her to step away from her phone and take breaks to recharge. Through it all, Karoline leaned on her support system, her family, close friends, and colleagues who reminded her of her worth. Beyond the headlines, her editor in particular became a pillar of strength. "You're not defined by what people say about you," he told her during one of their candid conversations. "You're defined by the integrity you bring to your work. Keep doing what you know is right." Inspired by his words, Karoline threw herself into her next big assignment, a feature piece on grassroots movements led by young activists advocating for climate justice. Immersing herself in meaningful storytelling helped her regain perspective. It reminded her why she had chosen this career path: to shed light on stories that mattered, to amplify voices often overlooked, and to challenge systems of power. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the De Niro interview continued to shape public discourse. Journalists across the globe debated the ethics of asking tough questions during promotional interviews. Some argued that such settings weren't appropriate for delving into controversial topics, while others praised Karoline for reminding everyone that no one is above scrutiny, not even Hollywood legends. The debate spilled over into classrooms, newsrooms, and dinner tables, sparking conversations about the evolving role of journalists in an era dominated by celebrity culture. For Robert De Niro, the aftermath proved equally complex. While his team worked tirelessly to shift attention back to his film, the viral clip of his heated exchange with Karoline lingered in the public consciousness. Critics questioned whether his reaction had overshadowed the very project he was trying to promote. Others speculated that the incident might affect how future interviewers approached him, potentially leading to softer questions or avoided topics altogether. Yet, amidst the noise, something unexpected began to emerge, a subtle shift in perception. As time passed, some observers started to view the confrontation not as a failure on either side, but as a reflection of broader societal tensions. Both Karoline and De Niro represented conflicting ideals: the duty of journalists to hold public figures accountable versus the desire of artists to control their narrative. Neither was entirely wrong, nor entirely right. Instead, their clash highlighted the complexities inherent in navigating truth, power, and influence in the modern world. The end of the month, Karoline found herself reflecting on everything that had transpired. She had gained fame, opportunities, and a loyal following, but she had also lost a degree of privacy and peace of mind. Still, she couldn't deny the impact she had made. Whether people loved or hated her, they were talking, and that, she believed, was progress. Looking ahead, Karoline resolved to stay true to her values. She vowed to continue asking difficult questions, telling impactful stories, and challenging the status quo, even if it meant facing resistance. After all, she reminded herself, growth rarely comes without discomfort. And if there was one thing she had learned from the whirlwind of the past few weeks, it was that standing firm in her convictions was worth every ounce of struggle it entailed. Months had passed since the explosive interview between Karoline Leavitt and Robert De Niro, but its echoes still reverberated through the worlds of journalism, entertainment, and public discourse. The incident had become more than just a viral moment. It was now a case study in media ethics, celebrity culture, and the delicate balance between accountability and respect. As time went on, both Karoline and De Niro found themselves reflecting on what had happened, each grappling with their own emotions and lessons learned. Karoline sat in her small but cozy apartment one quiet evening, scrolling through old articles about the interview. She had saved dozens of them, some praising her courage, others tearing apart her methods. At first, reading these pieces felt like reliving the chaos all over again. But now, months later, she could look at them with a clearer perspective. What struck her most wasn't the praise or criticism. It was how deeply the conversation had resonated with people. Whether they agreed with her approach or not, the fact that so many were talking about the role of journalists and celebrities in shaping society gave her a sense of fulfillment. She decided to write an op-ed for a major publication titled "Reflections on Accountability: Lessons from a Viral Moment." In it, she acknowledged the criticisms leveled against her, while reaffirming her belief in the importance of asking tough questions. "I don't regret challenging Mr. De Niro," she wrote, "but I do recognize that there's always room for improvement in how we engage with public figures. Journalism isn't just about holding people accountable, it's also about fostering dialogue and understanding. If I could go back, I might have approached certain moments differently, but my core intention remains unchanged: to seek truth and spark meaningful conversations." The op-ed received widespread attention, with readers commending Karoline for her honesty and self-awareness. Even some of her harshest critics softened their stance, acknowledging that her willingness to reflect demonstrated maturity and growth. For Karoline, this marked a turning point, a shift from being seen as a polarizing figure to someone who inspired thoughtful discussion. On the other side of the equation, Robert De Niro also took a step back to evaluate his reaction during the infamous interview. Known for his fiery temperament and unfiltered candor, he rarely second-guessed himself when it came to defending his beliefs. Yet, something about the way the confrontation played out lingered in his mind. He realized that while he stood by his frustration, perhaps his response hadn't been as measured as it could have been. In a rare move, De Niro addressed the topic during an interview with a respected film critic several months later. Asked about the viral clip, he paused thoughtfully before responding. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and say I handled it perfectly," he admitted. "When you're put on the spot like that, especially about topics you didn't come prepared to discuss, it's easy to lose your cool. And yeah, maybe I let my emotions get the best of me. But at the end of the day, I stand by my right to focus on why I'm there, to talk about the work." His admission surprised many, including the interviewer who pressed further. "Do you think Ms. Leavitt crossed a line?" De Niro hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "I don't know if crossed a line is the right phrase. Journalists have a job to do, and sometimes that means asking questions you don't want to answer. Do I wish she'd approached it differently? Sure. But I can see where she was coming from, too. We live in a world where everyone wants answers, and journalists are under pressure to deliver. It's complicated." The comment sparked renewed interest in the story, with many noting the unexpected olive branch De Niro seemed to extend, not directly to Karoline, but to the broader idea of mutual understanding. While neither party reached out to reconcile publicly, there was a subtle acknowledgement from both sides that the experience had changed them. For De Niro, it reinforced the importance of patience and perspective, even in high-pressure situations. For Karoline, it underscored the value of humility and adaptability in navigating complex interactions. As the dust settled, Karoline continued to build her career as a journalist, earning accolades for her fearless yet thoughtful reporting. She landed a coveted position at a prestigious news organization, where she covered issues ranging from social justice to environmental activism. Her reputation as someone willing to tackle difficult subjects only grew stronger, but so did her ability to navigate sensitive conversations with grace and professionalism. Her rise wasn't without challenges, though. The scrutiny she faced after the De Niro interview taught her to be more mindful of nuance and timing. She began incorporating feedback from colleagues and mentors into her work, ensuring that her approach remained impactful without alienating sources or audiences. Over time, she became known not just for asking tough questions, but for listening intently to the answers, and using those insights to craft stories that resonated deeply with readers. For De Niro, life returned to relative normalcy. The controversy surrounding the interview faded into the background as his latest film garnered critical acclaim and award nominations. Yet, the incident left an indelible mark on him as well. In subsequent interviews, he appeared more reflective, occasionally addressing the intersection of art and activism in ways that suggested personal growth. Fans noticed a slight softening in his demeanor, though his trademark intensity remained intact. In the years that followed, the legacy of the interview endured, not as a cautionary tale but as a testament to the power of dialogue. Both Karoline and De Niro emerged from the experience wiser and more aware of the complexities inherent in their respective roles. They reminded the world that behind every headline, tweet, or viral clip lies a human being navigating uncertainty, emotion, and the pursuit of purpose. Ultimately, the story of Karoline Leavitt and Robert De Niro became less about who was right or wrong, and more about the enduring value of authenticity. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief that staying true to oneself, even in the face of adversity, is the key to making a lasting impact. For De Niro, it served as a reminder that vulnerability, however uncomfortable, can lead to growth. Together, they proved that even the most heated confrontations can yield profound insights, if we're willing to listen, learn, and evolve.